They say kissing the cursed prince will kill me, so why can't I stop? They say kissing the cursed prince will kill me. So tell me, why am I standing here, inches from his lips, daring him to prove it? I was supposed to marry a noble, maybe even a king. Instead, the crown forced me to wed a man whispered to be death itself, a forgotten prince exiled to a castle of shadows. The people say he's cursed, that every woman who touches him either vanishes, or loses her mind. And yet, when he smirks at me like that, silver eyes glinting under the moonlight, I don't feel fear. I feel curious. Tempted. Maybe even reckless enough to find out what happens if I take that final step forward. Will it be my doom? Or will it be his? Hey you! Welcome to AUDIOBOOks, where love and logic are officially divorced, and chaos has full custody. Chaos begins. Chapter 1. The sealed letter arrived at House Valoria at dawn, carried by a royal envoy clad in gold-embroidered black. The moment the crest of the king's seal was presented, the entire household seemed to freeze. Servants paused in their duties, the guards stiffened at attention, and within the grand halls of the Valoria estate, Lord Alistair Valoria himself took the letter with an unreadable expression. He already knew. Alara, standing at the top of the grand staircase, observed the exchange with narrowed eyes. She had never trusted King Edric. The man wore a crown, but he ruled with a blade pressed against the throats of those who opposed him. And House Valoria? They were a family he had always viewed with wary eyes. House Valoria had been a formidable force for generations, tracing their lineage back to the founding of the kingdom itself. Unlike the other noble houses, who relied on marriage alliances and court politics, the Valorias had built their power on something far more dangerous: war. Alara's great-grandfather had been a general who, through sheer brilliance and ruthless efficiency, had carved out territories that expanded the kingdom's borders. Her grandfather had solidified their influence, amassing wealth through trade routes and controlling the kingdom's largest steel forges, ensuring their army always had the best weapons. And her father, Lord Alistair, was no different, calculating, ambitious, and dangerously loyal to his family. They were the only noble house powerful enough to challenge the king if they wished. Which was why King Edric sought to weaken them. For years, he had chipped away at their influence, stripping them of certain titles, denying them lucrative trade contracts, and ensuring they were isolated at court. But House Valoria had endured. And now, this letter, this decree? It was a final move on the king's part. A forced marriage that could either bind them to the throne, or destroy them completely. Alara clenched her fists. She was not some delicate noblewoman who swooned at the mention of marriage. No, she was a Valoria. And Valorias did not submit, they conquered. From the moment she could walk, she had been trained to fight. While other noble daughters spent their days in silk-draped rooms learning embroidery and courtly etiquette, Alara had been sparring with wooden swords, practicing archery, and riding through the family's vast estate with the wind in her hair. She was headstrong, sharp-witted, and, to the dismay of her tutors, utterly defiant when it came to following expectations. Your temper will be the death of you one day, her father often warned, but even he had to admit Alara had a mind sharper than most commanders in the king's army. She wasn't just a lady, she was a force. And now, that force was being sold to a man she had never met. Her father read the letter aloud in his study, his voice like steel. By royal decree, Lady Alara Valoria shall be wed to Prince Ronan Blackmore. Refusal shall be seen as an act of treason. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alara's pulse pounded. Prince Ronan? The name was spoken in hushed whispers, always laced with fear. The cursed prince? Marisol, her handmaid, breathed, her face pale. Kai, Alara's childhood friend and sparring partner, crossed his arms. The one who supposedly drives women mad? Rumors about Prince Ronan were endless. That he had been locked away in the Blackmore stronghold since he was a child. That his touch could break minds. That the king had abandoned him for a reason no one dared speak aloud. But to Alara, one question burned brighter than all the others. If he's so dangerous, why does the king want him bound to me? Her father's hands tightened around the letter. His silence was answer enough. He knew this wasn't just a marriage. It was a trap. The king has been looking for an excuse to destroy us, Alistair said finally, his voice low and dangerous. This is it. If we refuse, he'll have all the reason he needs to declare treason. If we accept, we walk into a game where the rules have already been set against us. Alara lifted her chin. Then we rewrite the rules. Kai swore under his breath. Alara, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, she shot back. This isn't just about marriage. This is war in silk and gold. Marisol wrung her hands. But what if the prince truly is cursed? What if? Alara silenced her with a look. I don't believe in fairy tales or curses, Mari. But I do believe in power. A slow smirk tugged at her lips. And if the king thinks he can control me, he is about to learn otherwise. Her father exhaled sharply, then nodded. Then we prepare for a wedding. That night, as the house buzzed with urgent preparations, Alara stood on the balcony of her chambers, staring at the dark horizon where the Blackmoor stronghold lay beyond the hills. Somewhere out there was the prince she was about to wed. A mystery. A threat. A weapon. And she would be the one to unravel him. Alara smirked into the wind. Let the games begin. Chapter 2. The ceremony is nothing short of chilling. The grand cathedral, bathed in flickering candlelight, holds its breath as House Valoria stands in rigid silence. The air is thick with the weight of unspoken fears and unvoiced curses. Alara, dressed in an ivory gown laced with gold embroidery, stands at the altar, waiting. Her face is serene, but inside, fury coils like a serpent in her chest. Ronan is late. The entire court waits. The king does not stir from his throne, expression unreadable, fingers tapping against the armrest. Alara does not allow herself to feel the sting of humiliation, but she sees the whispers forming in the tight-lipped courtiers. She does not move, does not waver. If this was meant to break her, they underestimated the steel in her spine. Then, the heavy doors creak open. A slow, deliberate silence fills the room. Ronan steps inside, draped in black from head to toe. His cloak, fastened at his shoulder with an obsidian clasp, pulls at his feet as he moves forward, unhurried, unbothered. His silver eyes gleam like moonlight against his sharp, angular face. Not a smile, not a smirk, just a gaze that strips the warmth from the room. He does not bow to the king. He does not look at Alara. He moves as if he is his own force of nature, above them all. A shiver runs down her spine, though she doesn't dare show it. So, this is the cursed prince. He stops beside her, his presence vast and unrelenting. The officiant, an elderly man draped in ceremonial robes, clears his throat and begins the rite. The words slip over Alara like mist. The vows, the oaths, the sacred bindings of marriage. Her mind races. If I am to be tied to this man, I will not be his docile wife. I will not be a pawn. Then the moment arrives. You may now kiss. No. The word cuts through the chamber, sharp and absolute. A collective gasp follows. Alara's breath stills, but she refuses to react as the air thickens with stunned silence. Her father's hands clench at his sides. The king's expression does not change, but she sees the flicker of intrigue in his gaze. This is not just an act of defiance, this is a declaration. She turns her head, studying the man beside her. Ronan does not look at her. His expression remains void of emotion, unreadable as ever. His refusal is not one of disgust or rejection, it is something else entirely. Something calculated. A smirk tugs at the corner of Alara's lips. Oh, you don't want to kiss me, do you? Then I'll find out why. She does not let him win this silent battle. Instead of allowing herself to appear rejected, she lifts her chin and turns back to the officiant. So be it, she says smoothly, her voice unwavering. A kiss does not make a marriage. The officiant hesitates, then continues with the final words of the ceremony. The moment the vows are sealed, a soft murmur ripples through the court. The ceremony is over. She is now Alara Valoria, wife of the cursed prince. Ronan turns and strides away before the celebration even begins. The great hall is alight with feasting, music, and wine, yet Alara finds no joy in it. At the head of the table, beside her, Ronan sits like a ghost among the living. He eats little, drinks less, and speaks to no one. The nobles whisper, eyes flickering between them like moths drawn to flames. Kai, seated a few places down, gives her a look one she knows well. What the hell is happening? She gives a tiny shake of her head. She doesn't know yet. But she will. As the night drags on, Alara grows restless. She stands, offering an empty smile. If you'll excuse me, I would like a moment with my husband. The hall hushes. Ronan finally looks at her. His gaze is unreadable, but she catches the flicker of something, a challenge, perhaps. She walks out onto the balcony, feeling the weight of his presence behind her as he follows. The night air is crisp, the stars indifferent to the tangled fate she now shares with this man. I don't like games, she says first, turning to face him. If you have some reason for making a spectacle of this wedding, then at least have the decency to share it. Ronan leans against the stone railing, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. You assume I owe you an explanation. No. But you do owe me respect. A ghost of a smirk brushes his lips, gone in a blink. Do I? Her blood heats. I may not have chosen this, but I will not be your puppet. He studies her for a long moment before finally speaking. You think this marriage is my doing? Alara falters. I didn't ask for this any more than you did, he continues, voice quiet but firm. But make no mistake, Alara, I will not be your obedient husband. She scoffs. And I will not be your silent wife. The tension crackles between them. A battle neither can afford to lose. For a long moment, neither speaks. Then, Ronan sighs. There are things you do not understand yet, he murmurs. Things you are better off not knowing. Alara narrows her eyes. Then I suppose I have my first task as your wife. His gaze sharpens. Alara. But she is already walking away, determination burning in her chest. He does not want to kiss her. He does not want to touch her. But she will find out why. Chapter 3. The marriage was sealed. The vows had been spoken. The court had gossiped and whispered themselves hoarse. Yet, for all of it, Alara still felt like a stranger in her own marriage. Ronan avoided her, slipping through the grand halls of the castle like a phantom. He did not visit her chambers, nor did he acknowledge her presence beyond what was required. If the world expected them to be husband and wife, then Ronan was determined to be anything but a husband. Alara had never been one to tolerate being ignored. The whispers in the castle walls did not help. The servants spoke in hushed tones about the forbidden prince, the one who had been cast aside, hidden from the world, locked away as if his existence itself was a secret too dangerous to expose. There were stories of terrible ones of the women who had dared to get too close to him. They never come back the same, Marisol had warned her in the dim glow of candlelight. If they come back at all. Alara had simply smirked. Then it's a good thing I'm not like other women. And so, when the castle slept, she slipped away. She followed the winding halls, past rooms left to dust, through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead kings. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and something darker secrets woven into the very foundation of the castle itself. It led her to a door unlike the others. Heavy. Black. Marked with silver runes that pulsed faintly in the dim torchlight. She hesitated for only a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the chamber was bathed in silver moonlight spilling through the high-arched windows. The space was vast yet bare, save for a single table scattered with papers, books, and a lone goblet of untouched wine. And Ronan. He stood at the window, back turned to her, his posture one of effortless ease. He was dressed in black as always, the dark fabric swallowing the light. But it was his presence that struck her like an eclipse, devouring the world around him. Alara had seen many men in her life. Kings, nobles, warriors. None of them had ever made the air feel quite so heavy. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. He hadn't even turned to look at her. Alara smirked, stepping further into the room. "You're my husband. Shouldn't I have access to my husband's chambers?" He finally turned then, and for the first time, she saw his eyes up close. Silver and endless, like storm clouds churning in the dead of night. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at something just outside its reach, intrigued, but not yet ready to pounce. "You mistake this union for something it is not," he said. "Go back to your chambers." Alara folded her arms. What kind of husband refuses to kiss his bride? His lips curled at the corners, but there was no warmth in it. Just amusement laced with something sharper. "Is that what's been bothering you, wife? My lack of enthusiasm?" She stepped closer, tilting her head. "I want to know why." "Do you?" There was something dangerous in his voice now. A quiet challenge. A line she was on the verge of crossing. Alara did not back down. "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, and then, as if testing her, he took a slow step forward. The distance between them shrank, the air crackling with something she couldn't name. He reached up, tracing a single finger along the edge of her jaw, barely touching her. Her breath caught. "You are a curious little thing," he murmured. "But curiosity can be dangerous." Alara's pulse thundered. "I don't scare easily." Ronan smirked. "You should." And then, before she could react, he was gone, moving past her, leaving the chamber without another word. The door shut behind him with a finality that made her stomach twist. Alara stood there, her heartbeat echoing in the empty room. She had wanted to know why. Now, she was certain she had only scratched the surface of something far, far deeper. And she would not stop until she had unraveled the full truth of the Forbidden Prince. Chapter 4. The moon hung low over the gardens, its silver glow casting long, eerie shadows over the labyrinth of hedges and marble fountains. The scent of night-blooming jasmine clung to the air, thick and intoxicating, but Alara barely noticed. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the man before her. Ronan. He stood with the ease of a predator who had already won, his silver eyes gleaming like a wolf's beneath his dark lashes. His cloak stirred in the night breeze, brushing against her bare arm like a ghost's touch. He wasn't supposed to be beautiful, not the way people described him. They spoke of his curse, of his ruined name, of the madness he left in his wake. But they had never stood this close. They had never felt the way the air shifted around him, thick with something unseen. Power? Sin? Danger? Maybe all three. "Kiss me," he murmured, his voice low, quiet, but edged with a challenge. Alara had spent her life surrounded by men who thought they could control her. Her father, the king, every noble who thought her beauty was an invitation to obedience. They commanded, demanded. But Ronan, he was tempted. He lured her forward with that impossible voice, with the way he never touched her yet left her burning all the same. She tilted her head, her fingers brushing along the cold marble railing between them. A game. That was what this was. And she was not one to lose. "Is that all it takes?" she asked, arching a brow. "A single kiss, and suddenly everything makes sense?" His lips quirked. "You don't believe me?" "Oh, I believe you want me to." His silver eyes darkened. "Then prove me wrong." She almost did. Almost. Her breath hitched as she leaned in, just a fraction. Just enough to see the way his pupils dilated, to hear the sharp inhale he barely managed to suppress. She could kiss him. She could close the distance, taste the mystery on his lips. But that would be playing by his rules. And Alara never played by anyone's rules but her own. Instead, she stopped. Pulled back. watched the flicker of something unreadable cross his face. "Not yet," she said, her voice a taunt wrapped in silk. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he covered it well. Too well. A man who had mastered control over himself far too young. Ronan exhaled, turning slightly, his fingers grazing the smooth stone of the railing beside her. "What about more than a kiss?" The word slid between them like a blade, and she felt it. The shift. The weight behind them. It wasn't flirtation anymore. It wasn't some harmless tease. This was something else. Something dangerous. Alara straightened. "What about it?" His fingers curled against the stone. "You wouldn't survive it." A thrill shot down her spine, sharp and electric. And that was how it started. The obsession. Alara had always been reckless, but she'd never felt like she was dancing on the edge of a knife, the way she did now. Ronan didn't just intrigue her, he consumed her thoughts like wildfire. Every glance, every carefully measured word. He had no interest in being a husband, yet he wasn't indifferent to her, either. He watched her too closely, responded too precisely, like a man who had studied every move she made before she even made it. And that was what drove her mad. She needed to know. So she tested him. The next night, she met him in the great hall, where the firelight flickered over polished stone and ancient tapestries. He was reading when she entered, reclining in one of the high-backed chairs near the hearth, the flames casting shadows over the sharp angles of his face. He didn't look up when she approached, but she knew he knew she was there. "I've been thinking," she said, coming to a stop a few feet from him. "A dangerous pastime for someone in your position." She ignored the jab. "If a kiss is so dangerous, why offer it?" He turned a page, as if bored. "Perhaps I enjoy the gamble." "And what about more than a kiss?" The page stilled beneath his fingers. A small pause, but she caught it. Then, slowly, he closed the book, setting it aside before lifting his gaze to hers. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because you fascinate me. Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because I want to know why you look at me like you're keeping a secret that could ruin us both." She didn't say any of that. Instead, she shrugged. Curiosity. He studied her for a long moment, then stood. The distance between them shrank in an instant, and suddenly, the fire wasn't the only thing making the room feel unbearably hot. He didn't touch her. He never touched her. But she felt it anyway, the weight of him, the raw power coiled beneath the surface. "You think it's just a game," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what makes you dangerous, Alara." She refused to look away. "And you think I should be afraid of you?" He tilted his head slightly, eyes glinting like quicksilver. "You should be. She should be. But she wasn't. And that would be her undoing." Days passed, then weeks, and still, Alara played the game. She pushed him, watched him, tried to piece together the puzzle that was her cursed husband. And with every night, every conversation laced with unspoken promises and restrained desire, she fell deeper. Because Ronan wasn't just a mystery. He was a warning. And Alara had never been very good at heeding warnings. Chapter 5. Alara was never one to heed warnings, not when they came in whispers, not when they were drenched in fear. And certainly not when they revolved around Ronan. If anything, the growing unease in the castle only fueled her obsession. She had spent nights pacing in her chamber, staring at the untouched side of their marriage bed. He never came. Never stayed. Their marriage was a formality, a performance for the kingdom, but Ronan made one thing clear: she was not welcome in his world. But she was his wife. That gave her the right to know. To dig. The first hints of his past came in the form of old records, half-burnt and buried in the castle archives, forgotten by time but not entirely erased. The more she searched, the clearer the pattern became. Ronan had lovers, or rather, women who sought to claim him. Each one is beautiful, daring. Each one lost to insanity. Their stories were buried beneath vague words, disappearance, fever, unfortunate fate. Lies. Alara knew a cover-up when she saw one. But it wasn't until she overheard the maids whispering that she realized just how deep the roots of the mystery ran. The Lady Eleanor, one of the younger maids, hushed her voice as she scrubbed the stone floor. She was the last one. She was the most beautiful of them all, an older woman murmured, shaking her head. Smart too. She had the king's favor. It was said she was to be Ronan's betrothed before she lost her mind. The words hung heavy in the air. She wasn't the first, the younger one whispered. And she won't be the last. Alara didn't flinch when the maids turned and noticed her standing in the corridor. She let them scatter like frightened birds, too fearful to meet her gaze. Good. She needed no permission for her next move. If the castle's gossip held any truth, only one person could confirm it. Ronan's old nanny. The one constant presence in his life, the one who had raised him when the king had abandoned him. If anyone knew the truth, it was her. The woman was not hard to find. She rarely left her chambers, a secluded wing of the castle where few dared to go. When Alara knocked, the door creaked open before her knuckles made contact again. Madame Liss sat by the fire, her gnarled fingers wrapping tightly around an old pendant. You've been searching, she said, her voice low, as if she had been expecting Alara all along. Alara didn't waste time. What happened to them? The old woman didn't answer at first. She simply exhaled, tired eyes shifting toward the flames. You misunderstand the curse, she finally said. Death would be merciful. A chill slithered down Alara's spine. Madame Liss turned to face her fully, and for the first time, Alara saw true sorrow in her eyes. It's not love that ruins them, she whispered. It's a desire. Alara's mouth dried. What does that mean? But the old woman only shook her head. You are already too close. Alara clenched her jaw. I am his wife. Madame Liss let out a dry chuckle, something bitter and broken. And that is why you are in the most danger. Alara wanted to demand more, wanted to pry apart the truth, but something in the air shifted. A shadow in the doorway. Ronan. He stood there, watching, unreadable as always. I warned you, Madame Liss murmured. Alara turned to face him, and for a brief moment, she saw something she hadn't before, an exhaustion that ran deeper than flesh, a loneliness carved into his bones. And then it was gone. Masked beneath the cold indifference he always wore. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice sharp. Alara squared her shoulders. I deserve answers. Ronan stepped forward, the light of the fire catching in his silver eyes. The answers will only destroy you. The air between them was taut, heavy with something unspoken. And yet, Alara didn't step back. If anything, she leaned closer. Then let them. A flicker of something passed through his expression, anger, or perhaps warning. But he said nothing else. Instead, he turned and left, the door shutting behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. Alara exhaled shakily, turning back to Madame Liss. What did he mean? The old woman closed her eyes. It is not my story to tell. Alara clenched her fists. Then I'll find out for myself. Madame Liss sighed, as if she had expected nothing less. Then be prepared, child. She met Alara's gaze, eyes filled with a sorrow that felt centuries old. Because once you see the truth, you will never be the same. Ronan kept appearing. Watching. Silent. Alara felt his presence more than she saw him. Sometimes it was in the gardens, where she swore she caught his gaze lingering on her longer than necessary. Other times, it was in the hallways, where she would turn a corner only to find him standing there, expression unreadable. Once, she nearly tripped on the stairs, and before she could even cry out, he was there, his hand gripping her wrist, steadying her. His touch burned through the fabric of her sleeve. You're reckless, he murmured, his grip lingering for a second too long. Alara swallowed. And you're everywhere. He smirked, but there was no humor in it. Maybe you should ask yourself why. And then he was gone. She hated that he always left before she could respond. Before she could gather herself enough to demand the truth. But one thing was clear now. Ronan was not indifferent to her. He was waiting. For what, she didn't know. But Alara had never been one to back down from a dangerous game. And this one? This one was just beginning. Chapter 6. The castle corridors stretched endlessly in the dim candlelight, their silence disrupted only by the rhythmic click of Alara's heels against the marble floor. The scent of aged wood, burning fire, and something faintly sweet, perhaps remnants of incense, filled the air as she approached Ronan's chambers. She was not supposed to be here. Not at this hour, not dressed like this, and certainly not with whiskey burning her throat, emboldening her in ways she might regret by morning. But regret was a feeling for another time. Tonight, her blood was too hot, her curiosity too insatiable. Alara pressed her palm against the heavy wooden door. It wasn't locked. A strange thing, considering how much Ronan seemed to enjoy locking her out of his life. She pushed it open. Inside, the fire in the hearth burned low, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. Ronan stood by the window, bathed in silver moonlight, his back turned to her. His long black coat had been discarded, leaving him in only a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, forearms resting on the window ledge as he stared out into the night. He did not startle. Alara. Her name on his lips was a warning, spoken with the low rumble of a man who had sensed trouble the moment it arrived. She stepped inside and let the door close behind her with a quiet click. The whiskey hummed in her veins, making her bold. Reckless. If you're so dangerous, she murmured, stepping closer, then ruin me. That got his attention. Ronan turned his head just enough to glance at her from the corner of his silver eyes. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Go to bed, Alara. I am in bed. She smirked, running a hand down the silk draped over her form. The fabric clung to her like liquid moonlight, soft and whisper-thin. Your bed. He exhaled slowly, as if counting invisible numbers in his head. You're playing a dangerous game. She tilted her head. You keep saying that, but I'm still here, and you're still standing there pretending I don't exist. Something flickered in his gaze, something sharp and hungry. He turned fully then, stepping forward with the grace of a predator, slow and deliberate. Shadows curved around him, the dying firelight casting golden streaks across the sharp angles of his face. Alara, he said again, softer this time. Warning her. Pleading with her. She took another step. He took one back. She laughed, low and taunting. Are you afraid of me, husband? Ronan's lips curled, the ghost of a smirk. Afraid? He scoffed. Of you? She reached up, brushing a fingertip along the collar of his shirt. He did not move away this time, but his body turned rigid beneath her touch. I wonder, she murmured. What is it you fear more? That you'll hurt me? Or that I'll find out the truth? He caught her wrist gently, but firm enough to halt her. The heat of his skin burned through her like lightning, sending a shiver down her spine. His voice, when he spoke, was raw. You have no idea what you're playing with. She did not waver. Then show me. Something dark flashed in his eyes, something terrifying and beautiful all at once. For a moment, she thought he might give in. That he might snap like a storm breaking loose, might pull her against him and silence her teasing with a kiss that would shatter everything she thought she knew. And then he let go. The moment he did, it was as if an entire room of air rushed between them. He turned away, pressing the heel of his palm against his forehead as if warding off a headache. Alara, he rasped, leave. She clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath her ribs. She wanted to scream at him. To demand answers. To force him to stop running in circles around whatever secret he was keeping. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she tilted her head and smirked. Fine. He didn't look at her as she left, But she felt his gaze like a brand on her back, burning through her silk and marking her even as she walked away. She left his chamber more confused than she had arrived. But one thing was clear. Ronan had nearly broken tonight. And she would make sure next time he did. Chapter 7, The Cursed Hunger. The curse had been a distant thing before a legend whispered behind hands, a half-truth woven into Ronan's tragic reputation. But now, Alara felt it curling around her bones, sinking into her skin, threading itself through the very fabric of her being. It started with the dreams. It started with the dreams. Darkness stretched endlessly, curling like smoke, wrapping itself around her throat, her wrists, her waist. She wandered through an empty castle, silent but filled with a presence she could not see. Then she heard the whisper of his name, soft as a lover's breath, yet filled with something far more dangerous. Ronan. She turned, but there was nothing there. And then she woke with a gasp, heart hammering, drenched in sweat. The phantom sensation of fingers brushing her skin remained, tingling at the nape of her neck, pressing against her hip. But the room was empty. Ronan was nowhere near her. Except, in some way, he was. By the fourth night, Alara knew something was wrong. The hunger, the ache was growing. She felt it in the quiet moments, in the way her pulse quickened when she saw him. It wasn't just an attraction. It was an unbearable pull, a force twisting itself into her very existence. She stormed into Ronan's chambers without hesitation, ignoring the guards who barely managed to react in time. He stood near the massive fireplace, arms folded, watching the flames dance. "You did something to me," she accused, breathing hard. "Didn't you?" Ronan turned his silver eyes on her. Unreadable. Unmoved. Devastatingly beautiful. Alara. Don't say my name like that. She hated the way it made her shiver. Tell me what's happening. He exhaled, slow and measured. I warned you. The more you want me, the stronger it gets. Her stomach dropped. What does that mean? His jaw tightened. You're feeling it, aren't you? The dreams. The touch that isn't real, but feels like it is. She took a step back, a mixture of fury and fear crashing through her. So, it is you. No, he looked almost pained. It's the curse. She laughed, sharp and bitter. The curse? What, it just makes me want you? Ronan's gaze darkened. No, Alara. It makes you need me. And that is far worse. She tried to fight it. She threw herself into training, into reading, into long walks through the castle's icy courtyards. She spent hours with Kai and Marisol, letting their chatter distract her. But it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. By the seventh night, it became unbearable. The dreams grew worse. The whispers turned into a voice's voice, low and knowing. Shadows curled around her wrists, binding her to the dream. And this time, she wasn't alone. Ronan was there. His fingers traced over her collarbone, down her arm, feather-light. His breath brushed against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. You want to know what happens if you give in? Yes, she whispered. His hand tightened around her wrist. His lips hovered above hers, close enough to steal the breath from her lungs. Then wake up. She jolted upright in bed, heart pounding. But the worst part wasn't the dream itself. The worst part was that the imprint of his touch still burned against her skin. Alara, you need to stop. Kai's voice was firm, but his dark eyes were filled with concern. He had caught her staring at Ronan across the dining hall, fingers clenched in her lap, body taut like a bowstring. Marisol leaned in. This isn't normal, my lady. Alara pressed her fingers to her temples. You think I don't know that? Marisol hesitated before whispering, then why can't you stop? She had no answer. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at her window, watching the moon hang heavy in the sky, her pulse matching its slow descent. When the wind shifted, she felt him before she saw him. Ronan stood in the shadows of the courtyard below, head tilted upward, watching her. Alara's breath caught. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, very slowly, Ronan turned and walked away. The hunger burned beneath her skin, insatiable. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that this was far from over. Chapter 8. The truth behind the curse was more terrifying than any whispered rumor or half-forgotten legend. It was not death that awaited those who loved Ronan, but something far worse. And at the heart of it all was a name nearly lost to time: Isolde. Isolde had not always been the cruel spectre that haunted Ronan's life. Once, she was a girl of uncommon beauty and ambition, born into a line of powerful enchantresses. Her mother, a seer, had foretold her destiny. She was meant for greatness, meant to love a prince, and meant to lose everything. She first met Ronan when they were children. He was the solemn, silver-eyed boy locked away in the palace, treated as an outcast even then. He wasn't like the other nobles, with their cruel laughter and empty words. He was quiet, reserved, but when he spoke, it was with the weight of someone who understood too much for his age. Isolde had been drawn to him from the start. She watched him from afar, fascinated by his solitude. He never sought company, never craved attention, but she saw the way he lingered in the library, the way he gazed at the stars as if searching for something beyond his reach. She wanted to be the one to reach him. When she was old enough, she became his shadow. She found excuses to be near him, stealing moments of his time in the halls of the palace, offering him small tokens of affection: enchanted trinkets, whispered secrets, books of poetry with lines underlined in delicate ink. She thought she was weaving herself into his world, but Ronan never reciprocated. He was always polite, always distant, and always just beyond her grasp. By the time they were both of age, Isolde had convinced herself that Ronan was meant to be hers. She had crafted dreams of their future together, dreams where he would look at her the way she looked at him. So, one fateful night, she confessed. Under the glow of candlelight, she stood before him, heart in her hands, and offered herself completely. "I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have always loved you. Say the word, and I will be yours." Ronan, ever unreadable, had simply stared at her. There was no flicker of joy, no sign of reciprocation. Instead, he sighed, his silver eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "Isolde," he said softly, "you misunderstand. I do not belong to you. I never will." The words shattered her. She had imagined many things: hesitation, surprise, even reluctant affection. But never outright rejection. She had given him her heart, and he had cast it aside as if it meant nothing. Rage bloomed within her, twisting and curling like a serpent. She would not be discarded. She would not be forgotten. The night Ronan rejected her, Isolde vanished from court. Months passed, and rumors of her disappearance faded until she returned, no longer the hopeful girl who had once dreamed of love. She had become something else entirely. Her beauty had sharpened into something unnatural, her presence unsettling. The air around her crackled with dark magic, her voice laced with an eerie calm that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. She had spent years honing her craft, delving into forbidden arts, seeking the one spell that would bind Ronan to her forever. And when she returned, she did not come empty-handed. Under a blood moon, she cast the curse. "If I cannot have you," she whispered into the night, her voice filled with venom, "then no one can." The magic wove itself around him, unseen but unbreakable. It was not a spell of death, for that would be too kind. It was a spell of hunger, and endless, consuming hunger that would infect anyone who dared love him. From that night forward, those who loved Ronan would not simply perish. They would be devoured by their own obsession, trapped in a madness that would consume them piece by piece until they were nothing but hollow echoes of their former selves. Alara stared at the ancient tome before her, the brittle pages revealing the truth in stark, cruel detail. This was the fate that awaited her. If she gave in to the feeling stirring within her, she would never be free. She thought of the women who had come before her, lovers who had fallen for Ronan, only to disappear, lost to the curse. They had not died, but neither had they truly lived. They had become phantoms of their own desire, unable to think of anything but him, unable to exist beyond their longing. They had given everything to love him, and in return, they had lost themselves. A chill ran down her spine. Behind her, a presence loomed. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. You shouldn't have found that. Ronan's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, a warning. Elara clenched her fists. You knew, she accused. You knew all along, didn't you? That if I fell for you, I would be trapped. He didn't deny it. He only stared at her, his expression unreadable as always. I warned you. Not enough. Would it have changed anything? Her heart pounded. Maybe not. Maybe she had always been doomed the moment she met him. Maybe there was no escape now. But she would not go down without a fight. She lifted her chin, fire in her eyes. Then tell me how to break it. A slow, bitter smile curved Ronan's lips. You can't. But Elara had never been one to accept the impossible. She would find a way. Because she refused to become another name in the long list of those who had loved Ronan and lost themselves. And if Isolde thought she could trap her in this prison of love, then she had severely underestimated her. The game had changed. And Elara intended to win. Chapter 9. Elara had played with fire before, but nothing like this. Nothing like him. Ronan was a storm contained within a man, silver-eyed, unreadable, and walking the razor's edge of something dark and dangerous. And she was foolish enough to stand at the precipice, daring him to pull her under. It had started as a game, hadn't it? A dangerous game of wills, tension strung so tight it could snap. She had wanted to understand him, to unravel him. But now, she wasn't sure who was unraveling whom. He had warned her countless times. You don't understand, Ronan had murmured in the dead of night, his voice low and strained, a plea wrapped in steel. You keep pushing, but this is not a door you can close once it's open. Elara had laughed then, tossing her hair over her shoulder, feigning bravado. What if I don't want to close it? And now, she was about to learn what that truly meant. The night was thick with the scent of rain and jasmine. A storm had passed, leaving the castle cloaked in mist, the air cool against her skin. Elara found herself in Ronan's chamber, drawn there by something more than curiosity, something she refused to name. He stood by the window, dressed in black, silver chains around his wrists, gleaming under the candlelight. His gaze was distant, fixed on something beyond the horizon, beyond this world. I shouldn't have let you come here, he said, without turning. But you did. He let out a sharp breath, tilting his head just slightly. You don't listen. She stepped closer. No, I don't. He turned then, and she caught at that flicker of something in his eyes. A warning, a hunger, a hesitation. But he didn't stop her when she stepped into his space, close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough to watch the way his throat worked when he swallowed. Why won't you touch me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His hands curled into fists. Because you don't know what you're asking for. Elara tilted her chin, defiant. Then show me. His breath hitched. A slow, measured silence stretched between them. And then, his hand lifted. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, something inside her ignited. It wasn't a touch, it was a brand. Heat curled through her veins, making her dizzy, making her want more. But then. Pain. It started as a whisper beneath her skin, a searing burn that curled inside her ribs and spread outward. Her breath stuttered, her vision blurring at the edges. Stop, Ronan rasped, yanking his hand back as if she'd burned him. Elara staggered, gripping the nearest surface, to steady herself. What was that? He was breathing hard, his pupils blown wide. I told you. I told you not to. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You told me not to? You act like I'm the one who started this. He exhaled sharply, his fingers raking through his dark hair. Elara, you don't understand. It's not me who will kill you, it's you. She frowned, still trying to catch her breath, her heart slamming against her ribs. That makes no sense. He moved then, fast, crowding her back against the stone wall, his palms flat on either side of her head. His scent dark, rich, intoxicating, filled her lungs. "You think you're immune to this," he murmured, his voice low, "dangerous. To me. But the more you want me, the stronger it gets. The curse doesn't break. It doesn't bend. It consumes." Alara swallowed hard. "Then let it." Ronan's jaw clenched. "You don't mean that." She lifted a hand, placing it against his chest, feeling the rapid thrum of his heart beneath her palm. "Don't I?" For a moment, he didn't move. The world held its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. His lips brushed her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "If I kiss you," he whispered, "you'll never be free of me." She turned her face towards his, their lips a whisper apart. "Maybe I don't want to be." And then, he kissed her. It was slow at first, a careful hesitation that lasted no more than a second before something snapped. Then, it was fire. A desperate, consuming hunger, teeth and tongues, and soft, broken gasps. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss until she felt like she might drown in it. But the moment shattered. The burning sensation returned, searing through her skin like liquid gold. Alara broke away with a sharp gasp, her knees giving out beneath her. Ronan caught her before she could fall, holding her against his chest. His breathing was ragged, his grip tight. She looked up at him, dazed. What is happening to me?" His silver eyes burned with something close to sorrow. "I told you. It's not me, Alara. It's you." Darkness swam at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Ronan's face, haunted, broken. And then, nothing. "I should never have let you get this close," he murmured. Alara awake, still trying to breathe past the pain. "Then why did you?" He didn't answer. Because they both knew that, too. It was never just her curiosity. Never just her reckless defiance. He had wanted this as much as she had. He had wanted her. And now, the curse was taking its price. Ronan moved suddenly, pulling a dagger from his belt. The blade gleamed in the candlelight, sharp and merciless. For a brief moment, she thought he was going to use it on her. Instead, he sliced it across his own palm, letting the blood drip onto the floor. The air shimmered, the pain in her chest lurching, as if responding to the scent of his blood. "You need to fight it," he repeated, his voice rough. "Or it will own you." Alara tried to steady her breathing, tried to push past the ache curling through her bones. But it wasn't just pain anymore. It was longing. Ronan's blood on the floor. The shadows coiling around them. The curse threading through her veins, whispering. It wanted more. It wanted everything. Alara clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. "Tell me how to stop it." Ronan hesitated. His silver eyes burned into hers. "There's only one way." The air between them was heavy, charged with something dark and ancient. But before he could speak, before he could tell her what had to be done, the door slammed open. Madame Liss stood in the doorway, her face pale, her expression grim, and stared in horror at the scene before her. "What have you done?" Madame Liss whispered. Alara opened her mouth to respond, but the shadow surged forward, and everything went black. Chapter 10, The Kiss That Breaks the Curse. The wind howled as the ground trembled beneath them. Shadows curled around the chamber like living creatures, writhing and twisting as if sensing their mistress's return. And then, she was there, Isolde. Her presence was suffocating, a storm of fury and heartbreak condensed into one being. Her once beautiful face twisted in rage, dark energy crackling at her fingertips. She looked between Ronan and Alara, her gaze simmering with betrayal. "Why," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Why do you defy fate? Why will you never love me?" Ronan stood firm, his silver eyes cold and unwavering. Because love is not something you can steal, Isolde. It is not a curse to be forced upon another. Isolde let out a shriek, the very walls quivering from her wrath. I loved you first. I gave you everything. And yet, you looked at me as if I were nothing. You looked at her, at every woman but me. Alara, clutching her chest, felt the lingering pain of the curse's grasp, the tendrils of dark magic still pulling at her soul. But even through the haze, she understood. Isolde had been a girl once, a sorceress born with too much power and too much longing. She had loved Ronan when he was young, had worshipped the idea of him, the way he carried himself, the way he moved through the world like he belonged nowhere yet everywhere. She had wanted him, and when he rejected her, she had turned that love into something monstrous. You were never meant to be mine, Ronan said simply. You were meant for something greater, Isolde, but you chose to destroy rather than create. Then let destruction be my legacy. Isolde raised her hands, black fire forming between her palms. If I cannot have you, no one can. With a scream, she hurled her magic toward Alara. It moved like a serpent, tendrils of darkness slithering through the air, aiming straight for her heart. Ronan moved before he even thought. He stepped between them, bracing himself as the dark force struck him in the chest. He gasped, his body convulsing, but he did not fall. Alara reached for him, horror flooding her veins. Ronan. His hands trembled as he gripped hers, pulling her close, his forehead pressing against hers. I will not let you be taken from me. And then, Alara did the only thing she could. She kissed him. It was not a timid thing, not hesitant or unsure. It was fire and desperation, a collision of fate and defiance. It was love not stolen, not forced, but freely given. The moment their lips met, the magic howled. A force, ancient and furious, erupted from within them both. Golden light burst forth, shattering the darkness like glass. The entire chamber trembled, the very air, crackling with power. Isolde let out a piercing scream as the magic she had once bound now turned against her. No, no. It is mine. It is mine. But it was not. It never had been. The curse was breaking. The bonds of madness that had ensnared so many women, the agony that had clung to Ronan's soul for years had all unraveled in an instant. The shadows dissipated, curling away like mist in the morning light. Isolde's form flickered, breaking apart at the seams. Her face twisted with anguish, a final whisper escaping her lips. I only wanted to be loved. And then, she was gone. Silence settled over them. Alara pulled back, gasping, her fingers still tangled in Ronan's hair. His eyes, silver and endless, met hers with something fragile, something raw. Is it over? She whispered. Ronan exhaled. Yes. And then the castle doors burst open. Alara's family arrived in a storm of fury and fear. Her father, her brothers, Kai, Marisol all had come expecting to find her dead. Instead, they found her standing, whole and unbroken, beside the man they had once feared. The curse, her father murmured, his sharp eyes scanning the room, the absence of shadows, the weight that had lifted from the air. It's gone. A tremor ran through the city that night. Women who had been locked away in madness, the lost souls claimed by Ronan's curse, were suddenly free. They blinked, dazed but whole, their minds no longer fractured. Hope spread like wildfire. But not everyone rejoiced. The king's fury was swift and merciless. He had intended for Alara to die, for her family to seek revenge and fall into his trap. Instead, she had lived, and the curse had shattered. His plan had unraveled, and his grip on power had weakened. The royal messengers arrived the next day with a summons. The king demanded an audience. Ronan, no longer bound by shadows, turned to Alara. Will you stand beside me? She met his gaze, unwavering. Until the end. Question for you, if you knew that kissing the one you love could shatter your soul, rewrite fate, and unleash a vengeance centuries in the making, would you still do it? Comment, like and subscribe.